I'm Ari Goldstein, Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to today's discussion of Truus Children, a remarkable new film about Dutch social worker Truus Weissmuller and her heroic actions during the Holocaust. Hopefully, most of you joining us have already had a chance to stream the film via the private streaming link that was provided through the museum. You still have until Tuesday, September 28th to watch the film, and we'll put that link in the Zoom chat in just a moment. Before we kick off today's program, the museum would like to thank the Netherlands Diplomatic Network in the United States for their partnership and generous support of today's program. And we'll turn to the Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in New York, Herman Qualls van Uferd, for some welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Ari. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to be present today during the screening and discussion of the documentary Truus Children. I'd like to express my appreciation and thanks to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York for the partnership, for partnering with us, the Dutch Diplomatic Network in the US, not just the consulate, but the embassy and our other partners across the nation in organizing this event. One of our missions in the US is to continue to express our gratitude to the people who helped liberate us from Nazi occupation during World War II. We thank the US veterans who fought the war, the women known collectively as Rosie the Riveter, the ones who filled the factories and the offices that man vacated fighting the war. Americans know these people well, either as individuals or as a group. But with this film, we're highlighting someone Americans might not know that well, a Dutch social worker and resistance fighter, Truus Weissmuller. Hers is truly an incredible story. She was a key person in organizing Kindertransport, or the rescue effort to save the lives of up to 10,000 Jewish children in the run-up to and during the early stages of World War II. Truus Weissmuller is indeed a hero of the Second World War, a hero of humanity, especially to the children she saved. Many of them grew up to live notable lives in the fields of science, academia, business, art, and much more. We're honored to have Ms. Ilse Bauer-Langsdorff here today, one of the children saved by Truus Weissmuller. In some way, Ms. Weissmuller is like Harriet Tubman, a woman born into slavery, an abolitionist from the 19th century. She was a famous scout of the Underground Railroad who led a dozen of missions to help escape enslaved people to freedom in the North. While there are many differences, of course, between these two women and their circumstances under which they did their humanitarian work, they both were kindred spirits. They both transported people, children, to safety at great personal risk. This documentary is more relevant now than ever. There is a worldwide rise in anti-Semitism. It is important to commemorate people who are fighting for their rights and who are rising above all else to save the lives of others. The story of Truus Weissmuller teaches us important lessons about humanity, about religious freedom, and about bravery. It is important to keep discussing and keep reflecting on these essential values. My gratitude goes out to Dutch filmmakers, Pamela Stuurhoofd and Jessica van Tijn, who have brought the story of Truus Weissmuller to life, also to me, long after she was forgotten by history. Well, she will no longer be forgotten, thanks to your efforts to making this both devastating and highly inspiring documentary. Thank you very much. Enjoy the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for those beautiful words of welcome to the Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in New York. When we first saw the film at the museum, we felt it was an essential story for the same reasons that you shared, Consul General, and it's our real pleasure to share it with our audience today. And we hope all of you joining will become ambassadors for this story and its lessons and share them in your lives. In just a moment, we'll turn to the discussion today. As the Consul General mentioned, we are joined by Ilse Bauer-Langsdorff, one of the children saved by Truus Weissmuller, and by the two directors of this incredible film, Jessica Von Taine and Pamela Sturhoft. The conversation between the three of them will be moderated by Michael Simonson, head of public outreach and archivist at the Leo Baeck Institute. Among his many projects, he has curated an excellent Kindertransport exhibition at the Leo Baeck Institute. So Michael, Ilse, Jessica, Pamela, thank you all for being here. We will play the trailer to the film in just a moment, and then we'll kick off the discussion. As a reminder, you have until Tuesday, September 28th to stream the film at the link that's in the Zoom chat. And please feel free to share questions for our panelists at any time during the discussion, and we'll get to them towards the end of the hour. Without further ado, here's the trailer to True's Children.
Because she saved me, she saved a whole generation, 2 generations. When we were there at the station, there was a train coming along with children, and a lady, a big lady, with a hat, I always remember her hat, and she said to my mother, look here, she realized what was going on. She said, look here, tomorrow I'm coming again with the transport of children, and you be there with your children and I'll take them along.
She did not have her head in the clouds. It wasn't just ideas, but practical help.
Oh, Truus Weissmuller, you know, they were all, because she made Sunday, I mean, she saved our lives. She literally, we flirted with death. So I think that it is the ultimate bravery.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Simonson. I'm the Director of Public Outreach at the Leo Baeck Institute. And before we begin our discussion, I wanted to thank the Museum of Jewish Heritage for inviting me as a moderator for it. So welcome, Jessica, Pamela, Ilse. And I wanted to talk a little bit, of course, I think it's an obvious question to begin the discussion. And what the starting point was, Jessica and Pamela, for you in making this movie. And I guess really in that regard, because she's such an unknown figure, I was wondering how you first heard of Truus Weissmuller and her work. I know that before you answer, a lot of people know of Nicholas Winton, who also did an amazing amount of work saving children, particularly from Czechoslovakia. And but Truus is so little known, though she also saved so many hundreds and thousands of children as well. And so I'd like to hear two things really, how you both first found out about her, and secondly, why nobody generally knows about her. So Jessica, would you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think Pamela was already getting ready to
Yeah,
answer.
I will start with the first part of your question, because the second part is more difficult. We were approached by Rabbi Lodi van der Kamp. He was writing, he's a Dutch rabbi, and he was writing a novel about the kindertransport. And he suggested that we should make a documentary about the kindertransport, because also a lot of people in the Netherlands, they never heard of the kindertransport, the Jewish children who mainly came from Germany via the Netherlands. And after that, they went to England just before the war. And then Jessica and I, we started to do research about the kindertransport. And what happened then was all the time the name of Truus Wijsmuller popped up. And we were so surprised that we never heard her name before, that her name is not in history books. So then we started to do research about her, and we found out more and more about this brave woman. And then we decided to make a documentary film about her, because we thought that this is what she deserved. And so the whole adventure started, and it took us 3.5 years to make this documentary.
That was mainly because of the research, because once we decided that she was worth of a documentary, we thought in the beginning, well, what if we try to find a few of the children that she saved back then and try to find them back and interview them if they are willing to. And if we do our research well, we might find even 4 or 5 children, and then we might have a really interesting story. And so when we started, we had the help of one of a Dutch historian who was actually already starting some of the research towards the children that stayed in Holland. So they came from Germany, they came from Czechoslovakia, they came from Poland. And then, like Pamela said, they went through Holland, and most of them went on boats to England. But some of them stayed behind because there was not enough room on the boats, or because they couldn't find that specific week, they couldn't find enough families in England, or for whatever reason, they made it to Holland and not to England. So she had started and gave us a sort of a list with some names, with some emails. And so we started, and then so before we knew, we found the first people. We decided that we couldn't wait. So normally when we want to make a documentary, we make sure that we have all the finances in order, and then we start the whole project. In this case, we were so lucky to find the first children now between 83 and 97, I think. We decided to go as soon as we could, not to wait till we would have all the money, not to wait till we would have all the children that we could possibly find. No, we would do it one by one to make sure that we would not miss out on any opportunities. So that's how it all started. And then eventually research became more difficult, but it became more easy as well, both things at the same time. More difficult because some of them were very hard to find back. We had some leads because of interviews with Truus Wijsmuller in books or in publications, but we couldn't find them. And then it took sometimes even a couple of months through Facebook or other contacts that we had to find someone back. But yes, we started, I think Pamela knows even better. Within a few months, we went out to do the first interviews in England. And so in the end, we were so lucky to find 23 people back. One of them, of course, in the attendance today. And we're so lucky that we have met several times now, actually, both in Germany and interviewing at the place where she was born. This is Ilse, of course. So yeah, in the end, it was a long road because of finances, because of research, and because of traveling through to so many places in the world to make sure that we could interview all of the children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the second part of your question is not answered yet, and that's a complicated one in the sense like, why wasn't she known or before the documentary? We try to shed a little bit of light on that in the documentary already, because it's a complicated answer. It has different aspects to it. But one of them most definitely is the fact that she was a woman. And strange as that might sound, it's a big part of the truth. When we research a little bit more on this specific aspect of her life, we found out that not only Truus Wijsmuller, but many of the women in the resistance in Holland, but most definitely in other countries as well, were left out of the history books, history writing even. And this is because they were focused on all the things that the resistance people had done, and it was sort of impossible to think that women were capable of doing that. There's one historian in Holland. She was part of the NIOD, which is the Institute for War Research. When she was the head of that institute, she said that she thinks that probably even 1/3 of all of the people in the resistance have been women in very courageous roles, not only preparing lunch for the husbands who then went out and fought the fight outside, but really like the masterminds. There's a few women who were leading people of groups in Holland and outside of Holland. So there was no real reason to leave them out of history, but yeah, that's how it went. And this is one of our missions with the movie as well. We think it's very important to give her that place in history, because of the inspiration that comes from that as well for girls growing up now. If they see the movie and they know that you're capable of doing that even when you're a woman, or maybe because you're a woman, I think that's a very important goal for us to get that message through.
I think, Michael, it's also a combination of factors, of reason why she is not very well known. As weird as it sounds, Truus Wijsmuller was also a very modest woman. She gave a couple of interviews, but not a lot. In the 1960s, she was asked for her memoirs. And so there is one book about what she did in the Second World War. But she didn't like to talk about it a lot. She didn't have children by herself. We think that's also an important reason. And one other reason we think is Truus knew how to deal with the Germans. She also spoke about the good Germans. A lot of people after the war pointed at her that maybe she worked together with the Germans. There was also a lot of jealousy in the way what she did. So we think it's a combination of reason of things why she's not very well known. And of course, we hope through this documentary, this will change. It's already changing. There's a lot more now on the internet than before we started. Yeah. But it's interesting.
Yeah. I think it's in my own work and the work of my colleagues at the Leo Baeck, for example, putting together this Kindertransport exhibit that we did, it with the Yeshiva University Museum, I should say. It's interesting to see how many people actually worked organizing these Kindertransports, and how many of them were actually women who were involved in social work. And of course, taking care of children being traditionally women's work as well, and a lot of refugee work being done by women. It was only natural, but yet the individual stories of these people are not very well known. And even with Truus, who was quite not a small person by any means in the world of saving children, and her dedication.
But also really a mastermind, because she was working with a lot of organizations, and that already was very important. She was like in the middle of this web of everyone, because when we found back information in the archives, it was always her name somewhere, and then like arrows towards everyone else, or she would be there and doing this, and she would give orders. But I mean, the mastermind part came where she had always a solution for something. I mean, it looked like a complete lost mission, and she would get her wit to it, and she would have her contacts, and she would have her determination and everything in order, and then she would do it. I mean, and that's the part where you can't just put her outside of history books. When she masterminded so many things, she was even part of a very important group led by a Dutch woman. And even there, after the war, this very brave woman who was the leader of this important group, she wrote a letter to Truus stating that they would always tell each other that she was the brave one. I mean, in a group of brave people, then the leader of that group writes to her that she was the brave one. So yeah, she was remarkable. One interesting thing that I would like Ilse to talk about as well. We think one of the aspects of not being that known is also because she wasn't always nice. She wasn't nice to all people. When she needed to be nasty, she would. I mean, she would not shy away if she had to make enemies, or enemies maybe not, but I mean, say out loud what she thought and everything. But then there was the truth as well with the children. And I think Ilse might be able to go into that a little bit more, because it's very interesting how she was so sweet to, at least what we heard from many of the children we interviewed, what a different person she was when she was around the children.
Yeah. Elsa, maybe you want to tell us, in fact, then a little bit about your own relationship with Truus. I know that you met her, I believe. I mean, it's all in the movie as well. It was in Frankfurt, right?
Yes, well, I did meet her. At one point, she came to visit me visit my adopted parents and me in Venezuela. The reason, of course, that Truus especially was in our life was that she was in Holland, and my parents had gone to the Dutch West Indies, and we needed the Dutch connection. And I was also fortunate enough to have been saved by her twice. I was once at her home and then once again at her home. So I owe a lot to her.
And what was she like, if I can ask, to live with? When did you first live with her?
I didn't really live with her. I was basically in a home, the Jewish Women's League home in Neu-Isenburg, and my mother was not able to keep me, and she was willing to have me adopted, and my parents who wanted to adopt me were already in Holland, so that is how she entered into my life there, and she's the one then who made the various arrangements in the first one, and in the second time I am definitely in the film, so I'm not going to tell too much about that. But I did meet her in Venezuela, and it was wonderful because she had gone to the Dutch Guiana. She had friends there, and that's how she came to Venezuela and visited us. So that was really very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know you do talk about it a lot in the film, your relationship with her. And I was going to ask as well, to go back to Jessica and Pamela quickly, that this work you've been doing, creating this film, you've also, in a sense, created an archive of the children.
That's still in the making, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about how that developed and what you plan to do with this archive of interviews and information about all the children and the rescue work?
Well, as filmmakers, we're used to having much more footage, of course, than you will be able to put into the documentary. But in this case, it was completely disbalanced. because we have like 90 hours of footage and the movie is like 90 something minutes. So that's one part that we knew that we had so much more than that we could ever put into a documentary. But more importantly, for the last, well, I think 1.5, 2 years, maybe even while we were still in the making of the documentary, we got so many requests from all over the world from people that were interested. We had a Facebook page, we had a website already up, and they were interested not only to see the end result and everything, but also in all the information that we were gathering by visiting different archives around the world, by interviewing all of those people that were still able to talk about their own story. So it was the first-hand aspect of all of those interviews that interested so much more people. Also from universities, people that are focused on Holocaust studies that thought that it was very important for them to be able to access the information that we had. So then slowly the idea grew on us to not leave it with the documentary, but to work on what is going to be the Truus Wijsmuller archives. And those will contain a lot of everything that we have researched, but also we will re-edit all the interviews with the 23 children, so that each of the children will have their own portrait, so to say. So you can eventually click on the photo of one of the children, and then you get like a 15 minutes portrait of that specific person. Or in some of the cases where we have interviewed a brother and a sister, or 2 brothers, or even 4 sisters, we will make sure that those will be portraits within the family. So that's a lot of extra information, and we just want that to be accessible to everyone in the world that will be interested in the story and to willing to look up more information about her from all ages, from all parts of the world. So yeah, that's a very important mission, and we're currently trying to get the finances in order as well. It's always the least attractive part of a story, but as filmmakers, it's a very real one. It's a lot of work. It's beautiful work to do, and it needs to be done, and we will. But we have to go in a pace that goes with the financing as well. So all of these afternoons and all the invitations that we get around the world are very helpful for that as well, because it means that step by step we will make sure that everything can be executed as well from our part.
And also after the release of the documentary, we found back 3 more children who were rescued by Truus Wijsmuller. And one of the children, we were able, after the documentary, to interview him, and hopefully we can interview the other 2 as well. And this is, of course, really, really special, because we found already back 23 children who were saved by Truus, and now we found 3 more children. And they deserve also their place in the archive.
Mm-hmm. And when you first were looking for the children, what kind of resources did you use? How did you find the first children? And then I assume those children might have known some other children, and etc. So I'm just wondering where you found lists of the children or documentation saying this child was saved by Truus in particular.
As Jessica already mentioned, when we started to do our research, we got in touch with Miriam Casing. She's a historian, and she did a lot of research on kindertransport, and also about the German children the refugee children who stayed behind in the Netherlands. And I think it was the first meeting we had with her. And then she told, I was telling her, well, hopefully we find back 6 or 7 children who were saved by Truus Wijsmuller. And then she looked at me, she said, no, you will find more children back. And I was kind of surprised. And then she handed me a list, I think with 13 or 14 names. And because she found, it was kind of a passenger list of the Bodegraven, the ship, the last ship who left from IJmuiden. And then Jessica and I, there were telephone numbers, email addresses, and we just started to call the children. And surprisingly, a lot of children, they were using email and Facebook. So social media has a good side, but that's how it started. And then some of the children knew other children.
Ilse was actually someone who was very hard to find back. It took a long time for us. We saw an interview that she once gave in one of the islands that she had stayed in, lived in for a couple of years. And then we thought we were close, and then we couldn't find her. And then in her case, names didn't help either, because there was Isabel and there was Ilse and there was Bauer and Langsdorff. But like always, when you have to try really, really hard, it's so rewarding when things happen. And that has happened a couple of times where it took months for us to find someone back. And sometimes there was this book that Pamela mentioned in the 60s, where she was interviewed. She sat down with a journalist and he wrote down her notes, her thoughts on different things that she had been involved in. And she would mention children as well by name. We called him this and that, or he was called this, or, oh yeah, there was his sister. And then she would describe the story of how she came to rescue this little boy or that small girl or something. And that was a lead for us. I mean, we would have the name and then try to find back this person. And in case of one of the storylines in the movie, for those who have already seen it, or if you're gonna look at it, it's the small boy. He is the son of an American drummer in a jazz band. The band came to Europe in the worst of times. They were in Paris when war started. The band had to leave there, but the boy was only 2 years old and his mother had died at birth, so he left him behind. This story was in the book, and we thought it was such an odd story, and it had so many details of how she brought him to her house, and he was there for a couple of weeks, and she didn't know what to do with him, and the embassy couldn't take care of the boy, although they had asked her to pick him up in Paris, and etc., etc. And then that took a long time, and finally Pamela was able to dial the number that someone gave to us, and then this woman answered, and Pamela was talking to the woman and talking and asking all those questions and telling what we were looking for and everything. And I was like, can you ask about him maybe? And then finally she had the courage and say like, and your husband? And she said like, yeah, he's sitting next to me. But she knew nothing about it.
Because we didn't know he was still alive.
No. And then she talked to him and she said like, well, I don't know the story. I will talk to him and then you can call me. I'll call you back within a week or something. I don't even know if she mentioned when she would call. But she didn't call back. And then after a week and then 8 days, and finally, after 10 days, Pam had the courage to pick up the phone again and to call her back. And then you can tell the rest of the story of that second phone call.
Well, people will see it in the documentary, or they saw it in the documentary. Yeah. It was an amazing encounter.
Because he didn't know anything. And then when we decided in the end that we were going to go and visit him in the United States, it turned out one of the most beautiful encounters because of the unfolding of the story just in front of our eyes. And we realized then and there that actually his whole being able to find peace with his past happened just on camera. And it's just as raw as you see it in the documentary. And afterwards we kept in contact, and we know that it was a very important day in his life because, well, finding peace is one of the things that you need as well. And being able as a documentary maker to get to that point where you can bring that kind of peace is very rewarding.
Weird things also happened during our research. And for something we did not have an explanation. For example, we interviewed Sophie Scheinowitsch, one of the 4 sisters, and she lives in Zurich. And after the interview, she asked me, did you already interview Wolf and Joseph Helmreich? And I said, no, I haven't heard of them. I don't know them. And then she told me, yes, they were also on the Bodegraven. There were with the 4 of us on the Bodegraven. And I said, I didn't see their name in our research. And then she told me, yes, somewhere I have their telephone number. And I said, really? And then she started to go through papers and books, and she couldn't find the number. She said, yeah, I'm sure I have their number, their telephone number. They live in New York. And then suddenly, I don't know where from, she came with a yellow Post-it, and then she handed over to me their telephone number. And I could not believe, I thought, no, this is not the correct number. And coming back in Amsterdam, I dialed the number, and yes, this was the number of Wolf Helmreich. And I told him that we're making the documentary. And then he asked me, yeah, please come, my brother and me, we want to take part in this documentary. This was such a special, because they didn't know Sophie Scheinerich, and Sophie knew the brothers who were on the Bodegraven with her. Really special.
Wow. I know that in the story of the Nicholas Winton story, to go back to that, it was only much later a lot of the children realized he had been, in a sense, had saved them.
Yeah.
And I wondered if in the case of Truus, if people knew, if the children at the time knew who was saving them, or this was a realization for children, in the decades after the war, or even you in doing your work is when they found out who had saved them. Because I think on the Kindertransports itself, so not the smaller rescue operations like the escape by boat, as for example, Ilse, what you were on, but like the larger transports of children from Vienna, did they know that Truus is the woman who had saved them?
It's different for all of the children. What we decided to do for the movie was trying to find within those 10,000 children, more or less, that came on the Kindertransport, or in general, all the children that you could say were saved thanks to Truus as well. Of course, this is a very important remark that she made all the time. It was never Truus who saved someone. It was always this whole group of people working towards saving the children. But what we have done is narrow down to having a group of children that have had real contact with her during the war already. So this is why but a lot of the children in the movie were the ones that stayed for a year, or a little bit less, or a little bit more in Amsterdam, in the Burgerweeshuis. And that means that they were in regular contact with her, and they have very personal relationships with her. They developed them because of the fact that they were there sometimes for a year. She would organize all kinds of classes. She would make sure that if the boys were getting of age getting towards their 30th birthday, she would make arrangements for them to have classes and do their bar mitzvah in Amsterdam. There's a few boys in the movie that actually have their diploma from their bar mitzvah in Amsterdam. So they have those special memories of their relationship with her. So I think, going back to your question, they were very much aware of Truus Wijsmuller. Sometimes they didn't remember her name. Sometimes they had no clue that she was this big, or that she'd done so much more than just being on top of this group of 70-something children in the Burgerweeshuis. And sometimes they had been looking for her. They knew that there was this woman, and they knew that they were saved on this particular boat trip, for example. And one of the children in the movie says as well, I knew, I wanted to know her. She, for example, went to work with Holocaust museums and was giving classes and guiding people around in the all to hope and hopefully find a trace of this person that she knew had saved her, but she didn't know who she was exactly. And then sometimes by sheer chance, they found her back, or not her in person. Many didn't see her after the war, but at least they knew who this savior was.
And of course, all the children who were on the Bodegraven, the ship from left from IJmuiden, they all remembered May 14, 1940, that Truus took the children out of the Burgerweeshuis, arranged the buses, and went to IJmuiden.
Mhm.
So even the smallest, even when you're 7 years old or something, apparently this is such an impactful day and event that you remember the smallest details, like the children in the movie that talk about Kristallnacht, for example. Ilse was 2 years old, if I'm correct. So that's a little bit too young to have like real memories of that day. But if you're 7 years old, you would say, well, what do you remember? Or even 5, but then there's details that turned out to be the real details. So it's also those impactful days in your life that you remember for the rest of your life, which is an interesting part of the documentary as well, where at first we were very cautious while interviewing people of a certain age, that you can't be sure if what they remember is what they remember or the facts that they remember. But then when we asked them about certain events that we knew they had all gone through, they came up with the same details, like the biscuits on the boat on the 14th of May that they had eaten, and a few things during the interview that came up, and that we were so surprised that all of those details came back 70 plus years after they had happened. And it was very reassuring for us as documentary makers that that this is something that you could put into the documentary, because this is the truth. I mean, you can also put an interview in when it's their version of the truth, but this was very remarkable for something that had taken place such a long time ago.
Mhm. And Elsa, I wanted to ask a little more about your continued relationship with Truus. I know that she visited you a few times, as you've already said. And did you stay in contact with her through correspondence, telephone calls, all through the years? And
Yes.
so to say?
I did have a chance to, I corresponded with them. That's one thing. And especially with her housekeeper, Sitje, who was the one who, they had lots of children and families who stayed at their home. And that's where, I stayed at her home, and her husband loved children. So her address stayed in my memory till practically nowadays. When I hear the word Nassau-Kade, I say, oh, I know what that was. And I did have a chance to meet her once. I think it may have been in New York when I was going to college. She happened to be in New York. But then she had some family of her husband's, a nephew of his, who moved to Washington. And so his name he was a Weissmuller. And so obviously the name Weissmuller always was around me so yes, I kept in touch with them. Yes, by letters mainly.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting. One thing about the Kindertransports actually is that it's not so, I think you've done a great job, first of all, with the film, Jessica and Pamela, because I know from my own experience, it's not so easy to find documentation about the Kindertransports, because so many organizations were involved actually, and so many individuals, and both in the country of origin for the children, en route, and in arrival. And there's not so much paperwork actually to be found about Kindertrans. It's very scattered. And so I think what you've done is really amazing. I wanted to say, to put this story together. Also, I think, for the Kindertransport exhibit that I've been part of, people still say, I've never heard this story. I never knew about these Kindertransports and what they were in the rescue of all these children. And then to be able to dig up a story within that story really takes a lot of research. So I thank you personally for doing that kind of research, discovering and then documenting this story. I'll ask one more question. before we move on to from the discussion to taking questions from the audience. And I know that a lot of filmmaking more recently has used animation to tell stories from the Holocaust. And I can think there's a movie about Anne Frank. There was the movie Dear Freddie, which the Museum of Jewish Heritage also had as a special event here. And your movie also uses animation. I thought that was interesting. I wondered if you wanted to comment on it. I'm assuming part of the reason for that is because, of course, there's no actual physical documentation on film, like film footage of some of these events, like when she goes to Eichmann's office. I mean, who was around to take a picture and record that? So I was wondering, anyway, if you had any comments about the increasing use of animation in telling these stories from the Second World War and the persecution of the Jews. There might not be so much else to tell.
No, myself, I once saw watched the documentary, the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it also starts with an animation. And I had kind of not a dream, but I really wanted to one of our documentaries to start with an animation. And also we thought it's a good way to pull the audience into the documentary. And some people there, they tell us after the documentary, we were kind of surprised. And I think this is a very good thing because they don't know what's happening. And the thing is that you hear her voice and telling what she did in a very fast way. We think also we want to attract a younger audience. That's also the reason why we using animation. But yeah, it's something different, and I think it worked out.
The nice thing for us is like it's 3-4 minutes where you get so many different storylines, and you're like Pamela says, like you're like, okay, how am I supposed to understand all of those lines? And that's not important. The important thing is that apparently there's so much information coming towards you, and then slowly when you start to watch the documentary, and actually I think when you rewatch the documentary, then finally you find out that all of those lines, because everything that's in in those 4 minutes has something to do with the rest of the movie. So it's all of most of the storylines in the whole of the documentary you find back in those 4 minutes already, and then you find the beginning of the movie, and you sit down and take it all in, kind of. But you're awake after 4 minutes.
Yeah, it's really on the sense of the cutting edge. I think that you're using animation for this moving phenomenon.
Yeah, it was a beautiful process as well, because the woman who made the animation had never done like this kind of animation or like in the beginning of a movie. She had done things that we'd seen, and the reason we came to her was because of something beautiful that she'd done before. But the whole process as a maker, and then having the animation and going back and forth and finding the best way to incorporate storylines and to give her more information about this Eichmann scene, for example, and then her coming up with like him getting bigger I mean, it's beautiful as a maker as well to be part of that process and to find the best way. And then we have the beautiful poster as well, thanks to her. I mean, it's her drawing of Truus with all the children on the boat, and yeah, it comes to life in a different way, and that's beautiful.
Yeah. So I think we'll move to the questions, and we'll have the first question from the Consul General. Actually, he had a question for you, so we'll have him turn on his camera again, and you can go ahead and ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Am I still on mute? No.
No, we can hear you.
No, thank you so much for just reflecting on the last part of your discussion. I felt a certain degree of confusion at the beginning because of the amount of information and the different strands and all that, but just what you described. And I thought it was, I came to the conclusion that it was fitting because it, in a way, potentially it had reflected reality during those days, because obviously now we look back and we know the full story, or we know parts of the full story. But then, you know, we didn't know what happened and what was going to happen. So the confusion element is an important factor that you inserted in it, and I that helped me. I thought that was very strong, and that links to my question. The character of Ms. Weissmuller, to some degree, reminds me of the character. I have not known her in real life, but Queen Wilhelmina, her contemporary, a very strong, powerful, will-powered woman, determined. But at the same time, obviously, they don't share a specific determination. And that is that Truus Weissmuller felt the apparent urgency that time was running out, even before the war hit the Netherlands. And that even from 37, 38, 39, she thought that she was on a life-saving mission. Whereas that was not, obviously there were those who felt that too, but that was not a general conviction shared widely across, let's keep it to the Netherlands, the whole society or politics. Does your research has shed new light on what actually was known at the time and what people could have known and what they should have known? Because she was so clear of mind. She had no doubt.
It's a good question, because it's something that has been on our mind for a long time. We've tried to incorporate maybe a little bit more information about that in the movie, and then decided to focus on different things in the movie. But we found out quite shocking information about her and what she knew, and also her trying to get that information to, for example, the Dutch government, and not being taken too seriously. And that was very painful for her. She's been interviewed in that same book, and that's, she makes very clear in a few instances that she really tried to talk to the right people and tell them, like, listen, I have information that comes directly from the Germans, that they will get into Holland closely to the day they eventually walked into Holland. And she wasn't taken seriously at all. She was sent away. You don't know. You think they're making fun of you. It's in the movie in the beginning, one line where she says, like, oh, those Germans are playing tricks on you and stuff. This was the reaction she got when she was pretty sure that the information the Germans gave to her was the correct information. There's this story, we never knew that it was 100% correct, but where they even invited her, well, hey, Ms. Weissmuller, we're going to Holland. We would like to have, to see you there, or she would invite them. Oh, well, if you come to my country, then have breakfast with me, or joking. We don't know if that was a real discussion that has gone on, but it was most definitely a fact that she went to Den Haag, The Hague, and she tried to talk to the right people and warn them and say, like, time is running out, every day counts, and I have so many children, I have to do this and I have to do that, and I'm leaving to Paris tomorrow. This was actually when she was taking Ilse on the second trip. It's in the movie where she takes her to Paris, then to the border of France with Spain, and then someone outside the Hague offices approached her and said, like, I overheard your story. I know they won't take you for your word for it, but I know it's true. And if you take this girl tomorrow, please don't go to the Spanish border, because it's going to be dangerous to come back. And this is why apparently Ilse was given to another family, who then traveled with her to Lisbon, which was the place where the boat eventually took her to her parents waiting in Aruba. And then Truus went back to Paris, and then she got the news that, in fact, what she already knew had happened, that the Germans had walked into Holland. And she made it back in 3 days. And that was a crazy undertaking, but nevertheless, she knew she wanted to save those 74 children that she knew were still in the Burgerweeshuis. So yeah, that's a very direct question to your answer to your question. She
But
knew.
yes, I'm almost sure that a lot more people knew what was going on also before the Second World War, and it was very well known that a lot of refugees came from Germany to the Netherlands, or tried to come to the Netherlands. And Truus, what she did, she was so brave, but also I think she thought she had to do what she did, and a lot of people didn't dare to do this and looked away, and she didn't look away. But I'm sure that as I said before, that a lot more people knew what was going on, and it was also in the papers that the Jewish people from Germany came to the Netherlands.
Kristallnacht was very well known. That was
Also
like
before
already in
Kristallnacht.
1938. Yeah.
Also before Kristallnacht.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just a recurring story as well about how you look away when things are happening. It should be more difficult nowadays because of all the information we get from all over the world, and we still manage to look back and look away sometimes. It's the two different groups, and probably more, but I mean the ones that face reality and know that they can do something, and then there's people that think it's too much or they can't do that. And then they choose to not do anything. And this is the important lesson that we try to get across as well with the documentary about making the difference. This is very important when we talk to younger people. We've been in Germany talking to 18 years old. They've seen the movie and they come with their own questions and their own observations. And in the audience sometimes are children that came from different places and that are children like the children in the movie. They had to leave their country and they had to start all over again. And then you have them in one group of people, the 18 years old that grew up in Germany, and then there's the people that came from abroad, and they watch the movie together. And it is a very important thing that they understand that you can make a difference. And the difference is not saving 10,000 children. The difference is doing something for someone who really needs it then and there. And that's the way she grew up. And that's the way we think we honor her way of being by sending this message into the world, honoring her.
Thank you. So I'll go through some other questions here. We probably won't get to them all. There's many questions. What's this for Elsa? Have you written memoirs about your early life?
No, but I have lots of wonderful writers around me who have written about me, besides my daughter and some newspaper articles, and things of that nature. So yes, I have interviewed a few times, and also at the Holocaust Museum, I'm in there.
Okay. Another question. Why, this is to the filmmakers, why did you choose to use actors to show the scene with Eichmann rather than the animation you used elsewhere in the film?
Maybe that's also a question of no, it's really expensive to make an animation, but we think also we thought also that it's a good way to show the audience what happened during the discussion with Eichmann, the negotiation with Eichmann, to use Eichmann better than animation.
And also because it was very special that after also a lot of research, we knew that there was this one interview on tape, apparently, because that we found like this transcriptions of an interview with Truus Wijsmuller after the war. And then after a long time of waiting and finding out where it was and getting it eventually to our house, or to Pamela's house in this case, we found what you can hear in the movie, the real original voice of Truus Wijsmuller. And in this case, it was so interesting how she describes this whole scene, going to Vienna the morning before, the way she walks into his office, the way he's sitting there, that he has a dog. I mean, it's almost like a script already. So being able to use her actual words, as we found them back in her interview, makes that scene very strong, because what you see there is like, well, you can imagine a little bit more of how those two people would have related to each other and how they were a very odd couple in that situation. But it's her words leading you through that scene. So in this case, it was for us a very strong way of expressing this key scene actually in the movie, because if it wasn't for that moment and her bravery that took her to Vienna that same day, and her tact, or whatever you want to call it, to convince him one way or the other to listen to her and to believe her when she said that she came from was sent by the English government, who was now willing to take in 10,000 children with all of this. It sounded as like a non-believable story, because she didn't have anything on paper. There was no official letter that said like, we are sending Truus Wijsmuller on behalf of, nothing like that. It was her trying in that same moment to convince him that she was telling him the truth. So in animation, maybe that's kind of...
Yeah, but also to give you an impression, 1 minute of animation will take 3 weeks or 4 weeks
drawing
of painting and designing, and it's time consuming. I would love to use more animation in documentaries, but it's really expensive.
Yeah. Maybe a last question. I'm sorry we can't get to more. But are Truus's memoirs, are her own memoirs available in English anywhere?
Not yet.
Not yet. You know if there's plans for that to happen?
We have heard people talking about that. It would be interesting to have them in English, but as far as we know, there's no plan to really make a translation of that book. But it should. It's interesting to read.
It's about time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, one more question here as I check the time to make sure. What do we know about Truus's background, the family she came from, her education, etc.?
She was born in a small town like
Alkmaar,
like 40 something minutes outside of Amsterdam, which now, by the way, has a beautiful statue of Truus Wijsmuller. This is all because of the movie. We came into contact with makers, and it's a beautiful, beautiful statue, big. It's Truus with a lot of children around her. It's bronze, and it's overlooking the house that she was born in. She's born into a family of a mom, a stay-at-home mom, and the father had a pharmacy in Alkmaar. But more importantly, and probably something that had a stamp on the rest of her life, she was taught by them to always be there for others if they needed help. And this is something that she has clearly taken very seriously and literally. They gave
after the First World War, her parents took Austrian children who were underfed into their house. So yes, Truus was brought up to help other people who were in bad situation, in poor situations.
Yeah.
Important for the parents watching. It means that you teach by example. And we strongly believe that that's the case. She saw that when she was a little girl, and she had to share her food or whatever in those times, and then later on in life, she knew what to do.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for a very interesting, enlightening discussion about Truus. And thank you particularly for the work you've done in making this film.
It was an honor.
To learn more about her and her rescue work. It's such an important story. So thank you. I myself, have been working with others on this Kindertransport exhibit, and I myself knew the name and that she was a big part of it. But with your movie now, I know, and your work, I know a lot more.
Thank you so much. And taking the last opportunity to shed some light on what we already discussed. We're in this process of getting the archive going. So if any one of the people attending tonight, today, has some contacts or knows ways or in which we can find more finance and everything to make sure that the archives will be there and up, we hope within a year's time, please contact us through Arie through our website or email addresses. We're willing to answer all questions and talk to you and make sure that we will be able to make it a reality. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Jessica and Pamela, thank you both so much for making this film, telling this story, continuing to preserve the records through the archives and make them accessible. It was really our honor to work with you. Ilse, thank you for being with us to share your own story. And Michael, of course, for being our moderator and helping us understand this history better. We are so grateful to the Netherlands Diplomatic Network in the United States for sponsoring today's discussion as our partner, and to the Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in New York, Herman Qualls van Offerd, for joining us today. The film will be available until Tuesday, September 28th at the link in the Zoom chat. And you should feel free to get in touch with the museum or look for our follow-up email tomorrow for any additional resources or questions. We wish everyone a great afternoon.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye from Amsterdam.